NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This is a Category 1 meeting. The purpose of the meeting is an opportunity for discussion related to Brown's Ferry's performance in the year 2015. Category 3 meeting. I said Category 1. The Category 3 means it's a little less formal. We don't have a formal presentation where we go over and discuss each individual slide. What we do is we have the slides in the background. We have these, what we call poster boards, that are sort of generic as far as helping people understand what the NRC does. With that, I'm going to open it up.
How about a question from the table here to the group, or to you or anybody else? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
This is Gary Morgan.
Yes, that's right. I'm Gary Morgan. I'm a member of some various environmental groups. I'm also an independent journalist. I write on these issues and write about several issues of government. And of course, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is appreciated. I appreciate y'all's efforts in ensuring, as our regulator, ensuring that nuclear power is safe for the community. I also appreciate TVA's effort. Man, I want to tell you something. I was here. Been coming to this for a long time. Joey and I was just talking about that. So I've seen the changes before the 95003 during that red finding, currently where y'all at now. I want to tell you, it's appreciated. There's some needed changes that are needed. I think those changes have been made, so y'all appreciate it. And I come to these things and ask questions about it. And I think you've seen me here before. I've asked you some questions. I've asked Dave some questions and other folks. Is one of the questions I would like to ask is there was a finding back in, it was mentioned, and it was a white finding back in April 2014. It's related to staffing.
Yes.
Has that improved now? Is that white finding been eradicated, and is the plant, the 3 reactors over there, staffed as they should be? So that won't be a recurring finding here.
I'll answer that, no problem. What I'd like to start with is kind of define what the staffing issue was. There was one particular position that most of the time was actually staffed, but there was a few occasions, and it was a control room position. It wasn't a licensed operator position per se. There had been a few occurrences through several years where it had not been staffed correctly. The Browns Ferry staff immediately corrected that. As far as since that day on, they've always had the correct staffing for that position and other positions also. The NRC's processes for things like that, though, involve not just a snapshot review. And in fact, there's a final closeout inspection that's related to that. That's going to occur in
May 16th.
Yeah, May 16th. So your timing of your question is actually pretty good. We monitor that position on an everyday basis. It's a key position in the control room. We're very familiar with what that individual, that position does. It's interesting. That position was actually an add-on after 3 Mile Island because some of the actions that operators took there, the NRC and the industry together felt like they needed somebody with more of an engineering perspective to deal with emergencies and accidents. So to answer your question, yes, Browns Ferry immediately corrected that problem. Yes, they have capable, qualified people in that position, and we observe them doing their job pretty much every day.
Right, that was in relationship to the radiological emergency plan and personnel dealing with that.
That position, one of their tasks is to support that, yes.
Okay. Thanks, I appreciate that. And another back issue that we've discussed before, if I may, of course, a couple of years ago there was there was a small fire in one of the control rooms where a component went bad. And as it turned out, it was a capacitor, I think, that had an overpower situation. Something happened to the capacitor. Anyway, as it turned out, there was different pieces of equipment. I like to call them antiquated. TVA doesn't. I call them, y'all probably don't like to call them antiquated, but they were old equipment, had a limited shelf life. And we had talked previously about a program to replace those equipment where shelf lives were expiring. Now, is that underway? Has equipment that has these components, whether it be into the control room or wherever it may be in the plant, are these components being replaced that the shelf life or the functionality of the component has expired? What's going on with that program? Are y'all overseeing that program? Is the TVA doing what they need to do to eliminate all the older components that have a shelf life that is expired?
You kind of asked multiple questions, and there's really multiple answers. I'll try to summarize it a little simpler if I can. There's all kinds of small subcomponents that are in a nuclear plant. There's capacitors, there's relays, there's resistors, diodes. I mean, thousands upon thousands of small electrical subcomponents. That was one of them. It did cause the Browns Ferry staff to call it a fire and respond to it. That particular day, the fire was out because it was electrical. They really didn't have much to do with it. Since then, not only have capacitors, and that was a power supply actually, not just a capacitor, but and a very small power supply. They're like little pots, is how I think of them, like a little tiny candle holder size. Since then, a lot of things have happened. One, they looked into that particular issue. They've had a large-scale effort for relays, which really are, I won't say more likely to fail. They're electrical components, but they're more important with their impact sometimes. That was on an enunciator. It wasn't on a piece of actuating equipment. It was just something to let the operators know that this panel had lost its power supply. It was a power supply for the panel. But the short, higher level answer that I can give you is we look for that kind of thing every day. They have a corrective action program. We follow their actions closely. We ensure that they initiate a condition report, is what they call it, to get it in front of their managers and decision makers. And we look for commonality and trends. We have an inspection item that looks at 6-month trends. We looked at relays in great detail. That happened, what you're describing, happened in like January, February 2012. In later 2012, we found that there was some relays called HFA relays, they were GE relays. And there was a lot of relays that had been in service for quite a long time. You talk about shelf life and such. There are various programs that look for things like that. There are programs that the NRC holds the utilities or licensees to, and one of them that has to do specifically with what you're talking about is what we call license renewal. And that has to do with making sure the plant will maintain reliable equipment for another 20 years after their initial time frame, about 40 years, I guess. So it's life extension, and license renewal looks at that. And just a couple weeks ago, we had one of our what we call reactor inspectors on site, and they choose samples. But what I want to make clear is these kind of components you're talking about, there's probably 20, 30,000 of them. We don't go look at every one. The burden always on operating the plant safely is on, in this case, the Browns Ferry staff. And what we do is, mostly because there's so many of those components, we look at the programs that are designed, like license renewal, for them to identify those kind of things. we look at their corrective action program. And so, sort of wrapped up in a bow, we do follow those kind of things. If they occur, we know about it. The failure rate of those things is very low. I can tell you that power supplies, relays, other small electrical components, when you're looking at a sample size of 20, 30,000, you might get, 5, 10 a year in a bad year. So, and what we do is we follow up to make sure that they are identifying the problem, what caused it, what the needed corrective actions are. And they are replacing a lot of these. But I can't tell you how many. I can't tell you what percentage. All I can tell is we are always looking out for those things. That's the best I can do for you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Any more questions, Gary?
There is. Hey.
Okay, how
See,
about if we
what-
let the meeting kind of play out, and then you can ask myself, any of my residents, Alan, and we'll go from there. How's that? Okay,
Y'all's meeting, you're running.
come on out. Oh, my interest. How many actual, what we would call members of the public do we have here? Anybody that's not affiliated with media or TVA, besides Gary? I know Gary. Gentleman in the back? I'm just curious, what brought you to this meeting? What interests you?
Well, we retired from TVA a number of years
Okay,
ago.
okay, that's fair. Okay. So, if you have questions, go ahead.
Well, I was wondering what specific deficiency was identified with the STA position that you were talking about earlier.
The real issue, as I saw it, was they had one individual
I saw
that at times could have another function. And so from a scheduling standpoint, I think also there was a little bit of a lack of clarity what the real requirement was among the Browns Ferry staff. But there was very few occurrences. This was over like 2007 till 2013, I think. So about a 6-year period. It was one position where, there was a lot of occurrences where they didn't have a designated guy for that, but they had more than ample qualified people on site to do that job. And so, reality, they were actually doing that job. They just weren't designating that that job had to be specifically dedicated by the one individual.
As opposed to carrying out unit supervisor-related duties.
No, the STAs, as far as we saw, were always filling just the STA role. But sometimes they might be the fire brigade commander or something like that.
Or work control.
Work
SRO.
control supervisor. They were still here or there. It just wasn't clear that they had specifically dedicated the right amount of people. And so our process, that proved out to be a white finding. So the NRC took it very seriously. And the most important thing is Browns Ferry corrected it. That's a good question. Anybody else that's actually public? Right here? Do you have any questions?
I just kind of raised my hand as I'm wearing my TVA badge,
Oh,
which wasn't the
okay.
best decision, but
Yeah.
I'm one of the outside contractors brought in from Massachusetts to work on the 805 transition.
Oh,
So I don't consider myself TVA affiliated, even though I'm wearing
Okay.
the badge. And technically they're paying.
805 is a very important program, process, project. And I don't think it's, there's a lot of people that don't understand. NFP 805 is a fire protection initiative that, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I think it's really a combined NRC and industry initiative to try to make the plant safer, specifically from a fire protection standpoint. And a lot of it is electrical, because one of the key vulnerabilities it's been identified a long, long time ago by, like I said, many utilities and NRC and other, industry groups is there's potential for electrical fires to take out some of the defense in depth, the multiple trains that is part of the design of a nuclear plant.
And it makes the failure, and this is just for anyone who
Speak
doesn't
up,
know.
tell us more.
No, it makes the failure analysis of the plant a little more realistic and brings us into what I think is the 21st century of modeling a plant.
Are you a fire protection engineer?
I am a fire protection engineer and a nuclear design engineer,
Okay.
so it's a lot of fun. But if anyone has any questions about this transition, it's actually happening in May. I
Right.
have no problem helping the field. It's a regulatory transition of their license, and it makes understanding a fire in any part of the plant and its failure of the components, as I said, more realistic. So before you would say something happens in an area of the plant, and you could say it takes out everything. Very, the word's deterministic, saying everything fails, all the electrical components. Makes for a very conservative analysis, but it makes CRs, those condition reports that you spoke of, and oversight quite difficult. So with this new license approach, which the plant's been approved for and will transition to in May, I think it makes for a safer plan and makes for it much easier for the engineers in the plant to correct deficiencies they might find.
I agree. I appreciate you saying that. I agree that that particular program, which is an initiative that the industry took on, and I'm sure it costs a lot of money, but what it really does for me is it improves the design knowledge of how all these cables and different fire protection features could cause fires, and how do you take actions to try to lessen the likelihood that these fires can occur. 805 is a tremendous program. There are several utilities throughout the country that have adopted it, and the one thing that I think is common at all sites is how much they learned about their plant that they didn't know before they started looking at it. It's really a detailed review of a lot of electrical drawings and a different angle or perspective on how can these components, there's a lot of high voltage, lines, high voltage cables and such, but how can those cause a fire? And once you identify all those vulnerabilities, how do you fix them or lessen the likelihood? And Browns Ferry has done a lot of modifications where they've moved cables so that one train is not near another train. And we still see that ongoing. They've been, Steve, how long have you been doing the cable separating? Probably 4 or 5 years at least?
Yes,
Yeah, so my point is they have been working on this initiative for a long time, and we see they're almost always contractors doing a lot of that work. We see that work going on almost every day. I saw one just yesterday, a cable, and they were taking measures to I don't know how to describe the thermo. They basically, when some cables of one train get near cables of another train, they can sort of insulate one of the two trains to make sure that the fire doesn't take that one cable out or that series of cables. And I saw somebody doing that just yesterday.
What is a name for the 805 program? You call it 805, but it has to have a name.
It's NFP 805, National Fire Protection.
National Fire
Agency,
Protection. Okay.
Code number 805.
805. I got
Yeah,
you.
it's like an ASME code. You just gave it a number.
Sure, I understand.
805.
It's a good question.
Oh, just something.
Can I let
Of course,
Alan answer the next one? Go ahead.
About this 805 program now. Recently, there's been some discussion about open phase events in nuclear plants.
Not necessarily related to fire, but yes. I know.
But of course that could, because in an open phase, this has an effect on all motors and actuators. Basically, if you have an open phase, that motor is not going to, or a pump may not function properly. So does the 805, which also goes to resiliency, does the 805 deal with open phase events? And causation of fires
I don't think it
in
does, because 805, the words NFP, the F is fire. Open phase was a situation that occurred, that became realized and recognized up at a plant up near Chicago, the Byron plant. You know, large motors are three-phase components. An open phase means one of the three phases one of the three phases is not the same voltage as the other two. And that's where you end up having problems with those large motors, because they may not have the right torque or whatnot. Alan, we were talking about that a little bit earlier today.
We were, and one of the challenges that the industry has right now is the fact that with these open phases, it's very hard to detect in some of the plants with the normal instrumentation that the facility has, that they were designed and that they were licensed to. So from that perspective, I know the NRC is reviewing that as well. And there's modifications that are ongoing across the industry right now to ensure that there's additional indication that is provided to the operators. So if you do end up with an open phase condition, that the operators will be able to identify it very quickly and take the appropriate action. And when you look at this from an emergency perspective, if you do have an open phase, it's very easy to rectify. And what you end up doing is separating the plant from the grid, and then the emergency diesels will come on and power your emergency systems. But the real challenge in doing that is ensuring that the operators can very quickly identify that, separate the plant from the grid, and then allow the emergency diesels to come on and power the plant equipment.
Gary, let me expand on what he said a little bit. The reason he says that'll work, the reason what he said will work is where the Byron plant and some of these other plants have seen this open phase is where power is coming into the plant. It's the high voltage power on these, large components out in the switch yard. So if the open phase is only out there, you basically divorce the plant from that condition and use your diesels, and then all the motors have a three-phase, in-phase, power. So that's what he was describing, is it is an alternative to go on your emergency power so that the open phase doesn't challenge all the motors. It goes back to the design requirements of all these new plants. There's defense in depth. There's normal power supplies coming from the grid, and then there's these emergency power supplies involving, diesels and batteries and such. So that condition is an issue. Browns Ferry is aware of it. They do have modifications planned to address that issue. And as they do, we will inspect those.
Has it been a problem at Browns Ferry?
To my knowledge, they have not had an open phase condition.
Of course, an open phase, of course, you're
Even
for
a degraded
motors,
phase, it doesn't have to be fully open.
right? But you have a series of motors in a nuclear plant that operates not only emergency systems but also pumps.
That's true.
You get a lot of pumps. So if that winding on those motors, if that three-phase is not proper, then you're wearing out your motors, and there's a possibility, what I have read from electrical engineers and the research that I've done on this, there is a possibility of fire, particularly if that motor is in a closed environment. So this is the reason I was asking about the 805 program. And I'm asking you, has there been any incidents of fires in electrical components, particularly motors, because of open phase that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of?
Yeah.
No, but that doesn't mean there hadn't been. I just don't know.
So like, we don't know if that capacitor burnout could that have been as a result of an open phase event, or a fire?
That's an easy answer. The
Yeah.
capacitor, in this case, was a power supply for annunciator.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't get three-phase.
Right.
It's a single phase, like in your
Okay.
house. So no, that's an easy answer. That's a no.
That's good.
You know, this has evolved. This is the first time we've done this kind of meeting.
You want to just have us mingle? And
Yeah, let's, you know, I think we'll just maybe sit down in various places and people can come and talk to.
Well, that's good, but speaking of fires, how about this ruptured pipe? Now, this is from your integrated inspection report. There was a fire
Yeah, I'm
protection
gonna let Tom
system.
talk to you about that.
Y'all want to do this individually instead
that's
of
kind of
as a
the-
group, huh?
He's my guy on this anyway.
So,
Excuse me,
Yes,
I
yes,
think
ma'am.
that those of us who came here from the public would
Yes.
like to hear what everybody's saying. Rather than just, his question is important to me, I'd like to hear the
Okay.
answer.
Well,
If we could do it that way,
Right.
it'd be more beneficial to us.
I don't have a problem with that.
okay. I gotta make sure my boss is okay. This is
All
a
right.
certain type of meeting.
I'll just go ahead and answer the crowd.
Well, let him finish his question.
yeah, there was a fire protection system pipe rupture November 7, 2015. And the reason that occurred, there was a smoke alarm that caused an overheating due to some food in the operator kitchen. There said as no fire occurred, but the electric fire pump, the B electric fire pump started, and when that started, a large break developed in a 14-inch section of the high-pressure piping between Unit 1 and 2 diesel generator building. And of course, I think that probably caused a problem, right?
Right.
Shut down.
So,
No, it
Did it
didn't shut
cause-
down the plant. No, it did. So the fire protection piping does not, there's no automatic plant shutdown from a fire protection piping break. So I think that's what is that what you're asking?
Right, but why did that break in that pipe occur? I mean, you see, leading up to that break, there has to be a reason for that pipe to break. Either it was old, it should have been inspected, and there was degradation of the material of the piping. You know, why did that occur? Why did that pipe break?
We had just received the causal analysis for that probably a couple weeks ago, and we're in the process of reviewing that and inspecting that causal analysis. So what the causal analysis did come up with, that was not a corrosion issue for that pipe, but you want me to say I'm going to continue inspecting or just?
well, it's an issue. It's a good question.
And we're hoping to resolve that in this
You
quarter.
know, the Browns Ferry staff has evaluated it, and they even sent off the section of the pipe to a laboratory to, you know, look at it. And, you know, right now, based on what the lab told them, it was a combination of causes. Some heavy loads, some trucks maybe ran over it. You know, anytime you get a problem, you get all the data you can get, and you try to come up with a conclusion.
So what we're still doing with that is still inspecting it, but we're still looking at all the different codes and standards to make sure that they're compliant with all those codes and standards
Right.
to control this heavy vehicle traffic.
The
They had done a demolition of a service building in
Right.
that vicinity. So the initial thought was that a heavy vehicle had driven over that pipe.
I got you.
It was
And
really
this was
old
underground
It is
pipe?
Yes.
Okay, underground pipe. So, are there any other underground pipes? So the next question, you know, transition, are there any other underground pipes where heavy vehicles could cause damage that would be much more critical to the operation, safe operation of the plant?
These other ones that are you're probably speaking of is probably the surface water pipes, and they do take measures to control any heavy vehicles going over those pipes.
Okay. I'm just curious, do you know what the depth of that from the road
About 7
surface
feet.
underground?
their report cited is about 7 feet.
7 foot?
You know, not all pipes are alike. Fire protection pipes have a certain code that they got to be built and designed to. The safe-related pipes that Tom referred to, you know, they were a significantly different, stronger material than the fire pipe. The fire pipe was isolated very quickly, within an hour, and the whole system was restored in about an hour. So, yes, the pipe failed. Yes, they don't want that to keep happening. Yes, they have an underground pipe program that's looking at that closer. Yes, the NRC has the license renewal program that I just talked about. And the same girl that was inspecting the issues with the long, term things, she was looking at that as one of her inspection items. And, her inspection was from a certain perspective, and she didn't have any significant findings related to her inspection. But that said, Browns Ferry has every bit as much reason to make sure that piping integrity is maintained as beyond the regulatory aspects, beyond just the safety aspects even, because there is a lot of that piping, and they want to stay ahead of issues, and we will follow their actions to make sure that they are trying to make sure that they don't have large catastrophic recurrent failures of that piping. That's the first underground piping that's had a significant failure, more than like a pinhole leak that we've seen, and that piping is probably close to 40 years old, so maybe older. We're looking at it. The short answer is we are inspecting that. We're still inspecting that. Some of our initial results are from license renewal. There wasn't any significant violations, and so we're looking at other regulatory aspects.
Thanks. I appreciate the answer on that.
No problem.
That's a tough one for us to answer because
Yeah.
it's still current.
Right. I got you.
Yeah, we're not done looking at it too.
Yeah, and it takes a while. I understand it takes a while. For instance, you cut a section of pipe out, you send it off. The laboratory has to analyze it, and then you have to look at the whole system. I mean, why? Is it a systemic problem? I understand the time. I don't know. I got a couple other questions.
But before you get to those,
Yeah.
I'd like to entertain those as well. Is there anybody else that has some questions
Yeah.
that they would like to ask?
Let somebody else have a chance.
I'm sorry I was late, so you may have already talked about this. I understand you had a format for the evening tonight, but I would like to, since this is soliciting input from the public, non-public, I like the forum where we can learn from each other, and because if he wants to ask you a question, he can email you and get a one-on-one answer. I think the benefit of this kind of meeting is for all of us to share information, because he may have a question that is very enlightening that some of the other of us do not understand has happened, and we learn when other people ask questions, and we learn from your responses. So that's much more beneficial for us, and hopefully for you as well. So I hope tonight Mr. Morgan can, based on his research, can ask some more questions, and we can all hear about what you all have to respond.
Good, thank you for the feedback. And we do have feedback sheets by the door as well. Since Browns Ferry has been operated safely, preserving public health and safety over the past year, we do have flexibility for the end of cycle meeting, and we wanted to try this format to see if it would give us, to see, number one, what the public, if they liked it, and also to try and give us some more contact time with the public. So that's good feedback. We appreciate that. And feel free, as we finish the meeting up later tonight, we do have feedback forms. So if anybody has any additional feedback, feel free to pick one of those forms up, and you can use that to provide feedback. Thank you.
And if you don't feel like filling the form out tonight, there's a QR code in the back. You can just go to the website and fill it out there.
I've got one signature.
Okay.
Charlotte's my admin assistant. She's making sure she does her job best she can.
Any other questions?
How many are from the public here? I mean, some of you are with the industry or with TVA or the NRC, but how many people are here from the public?
Well, we asked that question probably right before you got here.
Okay.
The two gentlemen behind you, young lady over here, she's in the industry, but she doesn't work directly for Browns Ferry. She's a contractor. And I think that's it. Gary, you know Gary.